All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this third session of our Force for Good series, focusing on sustainable and inclusive finance. My name is Maxwell Okello. I'm the Chief Executive of the American Chamber of Commerce. I wish to thank and recognize our partners, Hudson and Sandler, who have worked with us to make this initiative possible. And you'll hear more about Hudson and Sandler shortly from the Africa Chair, Genasi. I also wish to recognize and thank our speakers for accepting our invitation to participate in today's forum. Nuru Mugambi, Director of Public Affairs and lead on the Sustainable Finance Initiative at the Kenya Bankers Association, is going to be our chief speaker, or our main speaker, excuse me. We also have Birju, Sanghrajka, I hope I pronounced your name properly, Birju, Head of Corporate, Commercial and Institutional Banking, Client Coverage at the Standard Chartered Bank. Shem Mecheo, who's the EAC Regional Coordinator as the USAID Kenya Investment Mechanism. We have Timothy, Program Africa at the US Africa Development Foundation. And we also have Sigee Koech, who's partner, banking and finance law at Dentons, Hamilton, Harrison, and Matthews. And really to all of you members and guests who have joined us today, thank you and a very warm welcome to you. So before we begin, some quick housekeeping. We request that you keep your audio muted and your video off during the entire duration of our forum this morning, which will be 1.5 hours. We divided into 3 segments. The first segment is some welcoming remarks and scene setting from myself and Genasi of Hudson and Sandler. Thereafter, we will get into the presentations and we'll have actually 3 presentations, as I mentioned, from Nuru, Birju, Shem, and Timothy. So that's actually 4 presentations, excuse me. Thereafter, we will get into a moderated discussion, and we do ask and welcome you to submit your questions on the chat box at the bottom of your, or the chat tab at the bottom of your Zoom window as the session progresses. So ladies and gentlemen, creating a more sustainable future requires an all hands on deck approach from most sectors. Whereas previously it had been seen as an either or situation, with the business fearing loss of returns in pursuit of impact, evidence to the strong financial and societal benefits of sustainable business is now overwhelmingly undeniable. The private sector as a whole has an important role to play in redefining business as usual. The financial sector, however, has a key role to play in advancing sustainable economic development and implementation of sustainable business models and investments to advancing sustainable trade, economic, environmental, and social projects and policies. Even so, access to sustainable finance remains a challenge, and therefore, today's forum has a twofold purpose. 1, to give a measure of progress and success of Kenya's finance sector in advancing sustainable business and challenges experienced, including lessons learned and impact generated. And then secondly, to outline various mechanisms that would be used or that can be used to expand and support access to sustainable finance so as to catalyze adoption of sustainability as a core business practice, which is at the heart and purpose of our business as a Force for Good initiative. So at this point, I want to recognize and welcome Genasi, Chair, Africa at Hudson and Sandler, to give his opening remarks. Chris, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Maxwell. Good morning, everybody. My name is Genasi. I'm the chairman of Hudson Sandler Africa. We are a new communications consultancy for Africa with offices in Lagos and Nairobi so far, but we keep growing, so who knows. We're absolutely delighted to be AmCham's partner for this Force for Good initiative. And our role is to facilitate these workshops There's 4 of them. My colleague will be facilitating today. Elliot will be facilitating today. And we will be helping to sort of shine a light on the outstanding examples of social impact and sustainability and ESG-driven activity that's being carried out by AmCham members in Kenya. So it's been a real privilege to be involved, and there's so much good work going on with AmCham members. We're going to hear some more examples of that today, but it's very important that that is made more widely known within the country, and we're very honoured to be part of that. So without that, that's really all I wanted to say, really, and I'd very much like to get into the session and hear from all the members about the outstanding activities that are going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And Hudson and Sandler is a wonderful partner for us in this initiative, and one that we are proud to have as a member of the AmCham here in Kenya. So I want to kick us forward and get into the first segment, or the main segment of the program. And at this juncture, I want to invite Nuru Mugambi. Nuru Mugambi is the Director of Public Affairs and lead on Sustainable Finance Initiative at the Kenya Bankers Association. Since 2012, she has wide experience in the banking sector, having previously served as spokesperson and head of corporate and investor relations at Barclays, and has held various management roles supporting Fortune 100 companies in the US, including fast-moving consumer goods, telecommunications, forest products, and healthcare companies. She has spearheaded several strategic Kenya Bankers Association initiatives, including designing the Kenyan Green Bond Program, which saw Kenya become the first country in Eastern Central Africa to raise a corporate green bond. So with that, Nuru, I welcome you. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It's such a pleasure to be here. I hope I can be heard.
We can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Fantastic. And really just to thank Chris as well for helping facilitate this session. Chris and I, our paths interconnected at some point, and I really respect the work that Chris has passion for on the continent. So really kudos, Chris, for starting your business and being more purposeful about Africa. It's fantastic. Allow me to share my screen. Okay, great. I believe we can see my slides. So
yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so in my view, I think, and I think there's a general consensus, despite the heavy season we are experiencing as humanity because of this global pandemic, I think the effects of COVID really pale when you look at the full economic impact of climate change. The analysis I've been doing over a few years, I've been in this space of sustainable finance since 2012. And the analysis I've been doing since then really points to the fact that we really need to pay attention to the broader economic impact of climate change beyond the direct GDP impact. So we have seen through various publications and research that we expect a loss of between 1 to 2.6% direct GDP impact annually because of the impact of climate change. And I'm not going to get into what climate change is, because I presume through this series, Eva and the team have helped you walk through that. However, there is a further 4.4 GDP loss that we're not capturing in our assessments because of the food inflation. And when we talk about food inflation, we talk about the impact not only of drought and floods, but recently we experienced locusts. And the locust phenomenon was actually directly attributed to changes in weather patterns. Moreover, increasingly, the rating agencies are beginning to factor in climate resilience in how they assess sovereign risk. And we anticipate that climate risk can further reduce our yields on sovereign instruments by a further 1.7%. And then finally, social preparedness. And I think this is what we're now all really appreciating because of COVID. Typically, when people speak about sustainable finance, we automatically think of, the wind farms. But we really need to realize the full 3 dimensions of sustainability when it comes to finance. So social preparedness and the social dimension of sustainable finance is one that probably the developed world appreciates less, and we here in Africa appreciate more. And we expect a further 0.6% loss of GDP because of a lack of social preparedness, particularly in the rural and peri-urban areas. So overall, when you look at COVID impact and you try to compare it to climate change, we have seen in Kenya probably a reduction of about 4.5% because of COVID. When you add the full economic impact of climate change from an environmental and social and economic perspective, we expect a reduction of GDP by 8%. So really COVID pales in comparison to what we expect we will be experiencing if we do not address these issues. The financial sector really views its role as really the intermediary, helping to enhance risk management. And back in 2012, we began the discussion with the banks to really define what is sustainable finance in our African Kenyan context. And really it was to create and maintain long-term value, but particularly for society. And as I mentioned, really COVID has highlighted how interconnected our economy is with the social welfare. When COVID happened and people were told to stay and work from home, to social distance in the house, sanitize and wash their hands, we did not factor in our many brothers and sisters who live in systems where there is no infrastructure, there is no water, their houses are not big enough to social distance, and there is no internet. So how are we expecting them to make their daily wages in such scenarios? So this is the aspect of contextualizing I mentioned. So the banking industry, and I'm happy to see Lawrence from Standard Chartered and other colleagues in the room, the banking industry set out to determine the priorities for Kenya. Okay, so really looking at comprehensive risk management, and typically from a financial perspective, risk management includes your credit risk, capital risk, operational risk. But when we say comprehensive, we're going beyond those financial indicators to the social and environmental aspects. Promoting best practice, and enhanced governance. And the key point that came out for us in Kenya was the issue of growth through inclusivity and innovation. When we looked at all the international principles around sustainable finance at that time in 2012, be it the UNEP principles, UN Global Compact, African Development Policy, we looked at the Equator Principles, which I think a number of the US banks subscribe to, especially the Equator Principles and that the US banks subscribed to. We realized this issue of inclusivity, financial inclusion was missing. It was silent because these are developed markets. But from the African context, again, the issue of financial inclusion is really central, and accessibility is really central to sustainable finance. On the right side, I outlined the 5 principles that consolidate global best practice principles. So if you look at any sustainable finance principles around the world, you will see it'll touch on these 5 principles. But what is unique in the Kenyan context is principle number 2, the issue about growth through inclusivity and innovation. And of course, when you look at Kenya's sustainable financial inclusion performance matrices, you realize that Kenya is really moving along a bit faster than many of the other countries, particularly because of this appreciation. Now, one of the insights I want to share with you is the importance of capacity building. When I first started having these conversations about sustainability and sustainable finance, I felt speaking to myself because I think there was a lack of appreciation. However, my history coming from working at Georgia Pacific in the corporate affairs, understanding the issues around sustainable finance. And then coming home to Kenya, you realize we're not telling you to walk away from business. And I think that was the perception. So there is a need to really build capacity and work with constituents. It's not about exclusions. It's not about curtailing your market influence, but it's really about building consistently your capacity to fully embrace and implement best practice and sustainability. So one of the key levers we've been using is e-learning. We started e-learning, we launched the e-learning platform in 2015. And since then, we've reached over 36,488 bank employees with our sustainable finance training. I always mention every single number because to get a banker like Lawrence to stop doing his work and take an e-learning training on sustainable finance is quite a feat. So every single one of those 36,488 employees, we thank them because these are individuals who gave it a chance and said, we want to learn a little bit more. And when we surveyed these employees, about 5,300, a sample of 5,300, we asked them, okay, you're a banker. You didn't expect to be talking about trees and society in your day-to-day business. How has this training and how has this awareness informed your work? And the majority, the green is basically employees saying, listen, what you have trained us about will absolutely or will inform and influence how I do my work and see my work in the future. And this provided the basis for the banks to really start introducing and implementing various frameworks. Last year, we did an assessment. Since 2015, what have banks been doing? How has the training and the capacity building resulted in a change in practice, in a change in culture? So we found that in 2020, 76.2% of the banks had started integrating environmental and social aspects in their systems, including introducing ESMS frameworks. 57.1% of the banks began publishing either integrated reports or sustainability reports. 81% of the banks said that their management have started introducing policies and procedures to make sure that they are compliant with all laws that touch on environmental issues and align to the Climate Change Act. 76.2% of the banks surveyed said that their board has started actively monitoring and engaging on this issue of sustainability. And 90.5% of the banks said that they're using systems and technology to keep pace with their issues around ESG. So really, we find that by building the industry's capacity, banks were then therefore enabled and inspired to start integrating sustainability in a systematic and phased way. And we are seeing the results. What we also found in our assessment last year is that banks are really beginning to align to the SDGs. Of course, there are certain SDGs that align more closely depending on the institution's mandate, depending on the institution's investors and shareholders, and also depending on where they operate. But definitely issues around innovation, sustainable infrastructure, industry development, for example, manufacturing is a key area where we are finding a lot of green assets, a lot of energy efficiency and energy resilience projects. Banks are really supporting that. Education, gender, issues around food security and poverty. These are some of the thematic areas that banks are really supporting, not just from a CSR. This was really looking at the business aspect. We're seeing a lot more of that. On the left, you see photos there. We introduced a Sustainable Finance Award. It's called the Catalyst Award. And really the whole idea was to ventilate those practices that banks are doing around sustainability. Part of capacity building is showcasing, and sometimes you're talking different language, right? Somebody might talk about emissions, somebody else might talk about efficiency, somebody else might talk about energy resilience. But when you really peel back those layers, you realize you're almost talking about the same thing. So we did not want banks to feel that the West and Europe knows better and is doing better than them here in Kenya. We wanted banks to remember that whenever you finance a solar power plant, whenever you help a manufacturer introduce a wastewater treatment facility, you're practicing sustainable finance. You might not be calling it that, but you're actually doing it. So part of the Catalyst Award was really to help build just a level of confidence within the industry that they're actually sustainable. we also conducted some research to really understand the demand side. So a lot of the financial sector is influenced by the client, by the demand for that finance. And we find that, again, sectors like manufacturing, agriculture, and livestock and transportation are increasingly needing resilience investment. And this was some work. I'll just on the chat so you can read more about that. But you can see between the next 5 to 10 years, there is huge, I don't want to call it exponential growth, but there's a huge appetite, particularly on the transportation side. I was excited to start seeing electric cars are beginning to enter our market, especially the East African market. So there's a lot of opportunity for investors to realize on the green economy development. Most recently was a very innovative and comprehensive piece of research that was done by an organization called GNI Plus, together with several partners, including Kenya Private Sector Alliance, Kenya Climate Innovation Center, and more so the National Treasury. And Kenya bankers supported this research because they really wanted to understand how banks are supporting climate-aligned finance. I think what came out so well in this report, and I'll post the link as well, is the dynamics around where is climate finance coming from and what is the local participation. We find that, I'll walk you through the chart that you see. On the top left side, you find that the international actors, we should probably drill this data down more to the actual national level, how much is US, Europe, and Asia, but the international actors from a private and also public sovereign way are really shaping our domestic climate finance market. And then from a local perspective, the government, that blue is actually government through the National Treasury. That 28.3% is in terms of how much money is coming through from government, and the 14% is now local private. In terms of the climate change mitigation adaptation, we find that there is a lot of activity around mitigation activities and not enough adaptation. So when it comes to themes around technology and innovation, fourth industrial revolution, there are opportunities there for finance to really help catalyze. The final chart on your right just kind of shows you the nationally determined contributions, basically our Paris Agreement commitments versus how much money is flowing into those sectors. So you can see the first row there, the water and the blue economy. Oh my gosh, it is an untapped market. And I remember my dear friend, Kevin Kihara, who we unfortunately lost to COVID, he launched a tremendous company called Upepo that was showcased by Microsoft in one of their annual meetings. And Kevin started a framework around decentralized water systems. And I think the Upepo case study is one that we have not talked about enough as Kenyans. Energy, you can see, gets more money than it needs, I would say, because I think it's just low-hanging fruit and it's easy to deploy capital to big projects. And I think a lot of donors like that. They want efficiency and they want to deploy and say, we've done this. But I think where the more impact opportunity comes is where people are not paying attention. Water economy, transportation, health and sanitation, and of course, manufacturing. I think this breakdown of the climate finance allocation that I shared in the previous slide. So I'll call your attention to row number 3, which is the private domestic. And this is where we're just so passionate. Remember, I told you we've come a long way as a banking industry, from banks questioning whether or not we're asking them to walk away from business, to having a greater appreciation of their role and to actually practicing. So you can see about 27.4 billion in 2018 was allocated by banks to climate aligned finance. We've all heard of the Acorn Green Bond. If of not, well, now you have. This transaction is one that I think brings a lot of national pride for all of us. Acorn is the first green bond in East and Central Africa, certified by the Climate Bonds Initiative. It was the first green bond listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. It was the first Kenya shilling bond listed on the London Stock Exchange. We have fantastic policies and frameworks within the capital markets, including the project bond framework and the restricted public offer framework. And this bond was issued under both frameworks. It was also rated by Moody's. Moody's rarely rates private assets. They're typically on the sovereign side on the continent, first want to be rated by them. And it really demonstrated the important role the international financiers and development partners like Garantco can play. So Garantco came in, provided a credit enhancement that really gave investors confidence. And then also our local parliamentarians. I always say that you need to thank, in part, our local Mheshimiwas because of this transaction. We were able to lobby a specific constituents within the National Assembly, which is called the SDG Caucus. And this caucus has committed to support the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So our friends at the SDG Caucus, we spent some time really helping them understand what green finance is, what green bonds are, and they approved a tax incentive, and that tax incentive made all the difference for this Acorn transaction. And finally, because again, the banks had a greater appreciation of these types of transactions, banks played a key role. When you look at the placement of this transaction, right after the international investors, the banks played a leading role in placing this transaction. I'll point to KCB as one of our case studies. I know we're going to hear from Standard Chartered. As KBA, they're all our children. We don't try to, we have no favorites. So we always like to show the different faces of the banking industry. I know you're going to hear from Standard Chartered, but let me speak very briefly about KCB. KCB is the first bank in Kenya to be GCF certified, and GCF is really the framework that helps funnel through the trillions and billions that are committed to the Paris Agreement. So in November 2020, KCB became the first bank in Kenya to be GCF accredited. There are a number of other banks that are in the pipeline and at various stages as well. And we really wish them the best because it's not an easy process. KCB is the second in East Africa to be GCF accredited. So the bank can now allocate up to 27 billion. Remember how much I said banks overall invested in 2018. KCB now, through the GCF framework, is able to match what the industry overall is directing towards climate finance. And they have identified specific mitigation and adaptation projects that range between 50 million and 250 million. So they're looking at the big projects to support from a climate resilience perspective. Now, I mentioned social, and I'm about to wrap up. I mentioned social, and this is something that, again, when COVID happened and we're all told to stay at home and wear masks, we realized that we're losing and leaving behind more than 2 million Kenyans who have a temporary or permanent disability. So KBA partnered with Financial Sector Deepening Kenya, and we invited Enable, which is a US-based not-for-profit organization focusing on accessibility for PWDs. We invited them to help us implement a pilot project where we analyzed a few banks. They were very vulnerable. They allowed us to come in and really show them what they're not doing correctly from a disability inclusion perspective, and they learned from this process. And what we were so thankful about this project is when we shared the results from it last November to all the banks unanimously said we are moving towards full digital accessibility for persons with disabilities. So far, about 33 banks have set forth roadmaps towards PWD inclusion. One of the interesting innovations from this is KBA, that photo you see there of the three, that's Dr. Habil Olaka. We have Hudson and we have Tamara Cook from the FSD. We are developing a mobile app that will have 100 words in Kenyan Sign Language. And this vocabulary will be based on the banking environment. So bank employees will be able to download this app and search how to sign in KSL, welcome to the branch, hello, how can I help you? They'll be able to sign checkbook, they'll be able to sign central bank. So this different vocabulary that we are using in the banking hall, they'll be able to sign that. And this is one of the projects. I laugh with my colleague Nyakundi, and I always say, this is the project that will get me through the pearly gates. Nothing else I've done for KBA matters. This is the one project that really matters. So I've walked you through our roadmap. We started with defining our principles and standards, getting consensus on what our priorities are. We immediately went into building capacity, including through e-learning and roundtables like you're having now. And then we moved into promoting practice. So that show me the money thing. How do you show me the money? You show me the money through transactions like green bonds, GCF accreditation. And from a regulatory perspective, it's just making sure that you're ready to respond to regulatory changes. Of course, we saw this month, the central bank issued climate risk guidelines. And thankfully, because we've been building capacity of the time, the bank should be ready to comply with those requirements. Kenya, we conduct an assessment. The IFC out of Washington, DC does a global assessment of best practice in sustainable finance. And we're so thankful that everything I've walked you through has placed Kenya ahead of most African countries. Kenya is one of 4 countries in Africa that's considered advancing and advanced in this space of sustainable finance. And it's really because of everything I've just kind of shared. So this is my final slide. And my parting shot really is, this space of sustainable finance is not about competition. You see here photos of everything I've just described to you, and everything that we have done could not have been done without partnerships and without people. So really, we know that African saying that goes, if you want to go fast, you walk alone. But if you want to go far, you walk together. And the reason why we've come so far as an industry is because we have partnered with many people, many organizations, and really it has been a national effort. So allow me to stop there, and I welcome questions. Thank you.
Nuru, this is really impressive. Thank you so much for unpacking this for us. It's fascinating, the amount of space, if I may put it that way, that you've been able to cover in such a short time, and definitely one to emulate for other industries and associations in terms of bringing together the right partnerships that would help advance the aspects of sustainable finance. So I'm going to, we won't take questions at this point in time. We will have interaction at the Q&A, the moderated segment with Elliot. And so at this juncture, I want to bring in Birju. Birju is the head of corporate, commercial and institutional banking at Standard Chartered, to make his presentation. Birju, over to you.
Thank you, Max. And thank you, Nuru. Always a hard act to follow. And hopefully one of your children will do as well as you. So Standard Chartered, we're an emerging markets bank. And it's interesting. It's a good segue to go from Nuru's side, from a industry perspective to we who actually look at the clients and see what's going on that front. So I talk about we're an emerging markets bank. We're present in 59 markets and in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And these are some of the most attractive markets for investment. But at the same time, these are the markets that are most vulnerable to climate risk and emissions, etc. And therefore, a bank like us has an obligation to help both governments and our clients and the communities in which we operate achieve a just transition. And that's a big area of focus for Standard Chartered, the transition piece of this, because we do realize that a just transition means balancing the need to get to net zero, but at the same time supporting economic development as we work towards that goal. So the 1.5% targets that that was agreed at the Paris Agreement in terms of keeping it below 1.5%, the rise in temperatures, obviously is center to net zero. Standard Chartered announced its net zero ambitions a couple of months ago, meaning we will get to net zero by 2050. But by 2030, we have transitional targets. Yesterday, and this is just hot off the press, we came out with more details around how we intend to achieve that. We've published a white paper on our methodologies to achieve that, and we're being completely transparent about how we intend to go about this. And part of that will mean bringing new products to the market. So in certain parts of the world, we've already launched sustainable deposits. In 2018, we launched the world's first sustainable blue bond for the government of Seychelles, and we continue to do work in the product innovation space. The second piece is we've identified 3 industries So yeah, fine. We've identified 3 industries: metals and mining, oil and gas, and metals and mining, oil and gas, and one more. Anyway, that are carbon intensive, and the work we intend to do to them to help them transition to a net zero world. Power is the 3rd one. Sorry. So that's sort of the broad spectrum. Now, in coming up to that, we've polled a number of our clients. If you could just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we went out last year and this year, and we published 2 reports that are available on our website, or we can send you the links to them, to understand from our clients what are the barriers and opportunities to achieving net zero. So if you look at this, 55% of business leaders believe their companies are not transitioning fast enough, and this is of our sample size. And as I talked about, the carbon-intensive industries based in emerging markets are struggling most with transition. We operate in 59 markets. 33 of those do not have net zero plans, or they have long-dated net zero plans. But for example, one of the things we announced yesterday is, irrespective of that, for clients in those 3 industries I talked about, metals and mining, power, oil and gas, we expect them by end of next year, end of 2022, to have a strategy to transition. So, we want to lead some of this and not wait for policy statements to come out on this front. So the barriers to progress towards sustainability, things like high levels of investment, which require funding. Nuru talked about the funding gap, standardized frameworks, absence of affordable technology. And frankly, we do realize that not all the technology is available today, or it's not cheap. And over time, and that's why 2050 sits out there, over time, the technology will come to the fore. But most worrying for us that 53% of the businesses we polled do not support the aims of the Paris Agreement. This worries us, obviously. And then when you break down that data into the African markets, it's 55% believe their business isn't transitioning fast enough. 68% have a finance problem, and 35% said they support the Paris Agreement, which means 65% did not. Next slide. Within that, we looked at the multinational segments. Now, one of our big USPs as a bank is where we play our network pretty well, connecting clients from Europe, America, Asia, Middle East to opportunities in Africa and vice versa. And so we asked them what they thought of net zero over the next few decades. Now, it's encouraging that, by and large, the bulk of them already had set net zero carbon emission targets, 2050 and some even earlier. But one of the most interesting things we found is that the bulk of their emissions don't come from their own operations, it comes from the supply chains. And this is where banks also come in and play a role, i.e., while we bank the large companies, we also bank the SMEs that support them across the world. And this is not just about Standard Chartered, this is about the industry in general. And you ask them a little bit about what they intend to do with these suppliers in the supply chains. A third could potentially be removed from the process if they don't transition. 56% don't have the knowledge of what they need to do in terms of reducing emissions and how to continue to be a supplier to some of these MNCs. And lastly, almost a third, as I said, of the MNC said they'll take a zero tolerance approach to suppliers who refuse to transition. If you could go to the next slide, please. So if we look at now the response to sustainability from the same set of multinationals, almost half said that any supplier who transitions or has a plan would get preferred status. In certain instances, they're willing to pay more for suppliers who transition, so more for the product for suppliers who transition. But only 18% are helping with grants or loans to help their suppliers transition. And this is where, you know, the industry and other players in the financing realm come to the fore. Now, next slide, please. One more. So I talked about the markets in which we operate. So, you know, if you think about it, it's 6 markets in China, 15 markets in Greater China and North Asia, 15 markets in ASEAN and South Asia, 25 in Africa and the Middle East, and 1 in Europe and North America. And that's just to show you that we, given these are primarily the world's factories, if you like. We as Standard Chartered have to do something about this. We don't have a choice. 1, it's the right thing to do, and 2, we don't have a choice. And also we have scale. So when you look at the bottom, we're the 3rd largest trade bank in the world. We're number 1 for project finance in our chosen markets, Asia, Africa, Middle East. And we have the ability to catalyze finance. Now, these are not just statistics that as a sales pitch. This is simply to tell you that we have an imperative to do something, and we have the ability to do something. Next slide, please. In terms of sustainable finance and our philosophy, so it's alignment to the SDGs. But again, at the the first one, only 10% of the SDGs are financed in Africa. So there's a massive funding gap. From a responsible finance perspective, we've had a ESG, environmental social governance team since 1997. Every year we do 19,000 individual ESG assessments on our clients. So every single credit application goes through a ESG assessment, and we in certain instances work with clients to help them plug certain gaps. And then I talked about the impact that we have. The first blue bond, sustainable deposits, and we have a huge pipeline of products we want to bring to the market, things like green mortgages, sustainable investing on our wealth management platforms. So there is a massive piece of work going on there. If we could go to the last slide, please. Won't talk about everything with all the products we have, but just needless to say that as Nuru said, this is not about one bank, one financier. It's about partnerships. We all realize the scale of the challenges, and we need partnerships to achieve this. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Birju. Again, another fascinating presentation from the finance space, and I know there's a lot of work that you guys are doing around this space, and we're really proud to be associated with you. I know there's a burning question from Neha. Neha, if you could just hold that thought. I want to keep the program going. We will get to questions at the moderated session in a little while. So Birju, once again, thank you very much for your presentation. And now I want to bring Shem Mecheo, East Africa Regional Coordinator at the USAID Kenya Investment Mechanism, to the, there you go, Shem. Go ahead and give your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Maxwell, and thank you, the preceding presenters. Yes, so I will speak largely, on sustainable and inclusive finance, but from, a development, perspective. And so I will proceed. So now I work for USAID KIM, which is stands for Kenya Investment Mechanism, which is a USAID-funded 5-year activity designed to unlock a minimum of $520 million of investment for targeted prime key sectors in Kenya and East African community countries. And of course, agriculture is key, amongst these sectors, as well as, regional trade and investment opportunities under what we call the Prosper Africa Initiative. Now, what this USAID KIM activity does is supporting mobilization of private capital and accelerate enterprise-driven development. Of course, agriculture is key, but we also have other key sectors, for instance, energy, I think which has been talked about by previous speakers, health, environment and tourism, education, workforce development, infrastructure, and WASH, that is water, sanitation, and hygiene. Now, as a project, the USAID design of the Kenya Investment Mechanism is to appropriately address, challenges in mobilizing funding. So here we are looking at the SME end, enterprise end, and at the financials end, or levels. So basically referring to the supply and demand sides. Next slide, please. So the key objectives for this intervention is, as I mentioned, $520 million US. The scope is the East African region. And now, just before that one, Eva, these are the models that we are employing, in this, can I say, activity, to unlock capital. And we use what we are referring to as the payment for results model. Now, at the supply side, we are working closely with financial institutions or financiers. And basically our focus is private capital. So we're talking about equity or debt. And what happens is that pay for results, is implemented when finance or targets, or what you can call also milestones in terms of, SME access to financing are met. And in this case, financiers, we are leveraging on what the financiers have, to lend or invest, in the various sectors that I've mentioned. And the key principal failure here that the project is addressing is limited, scalability of financial products that are tailored, to the sectors that I mentioned. We know that agriculture, for example, is perceived to be a highly risk, can I say, sector, so to speak. But, the project now is coming in with this tool of, pay for results to unlock capital, and direct it towards this sector. At the demand end, looking at the business advisory service providers, these are, what we call neutral intermediaries who are able to work with the SMEs or enterprises to help them navigate the markets, help them, structure, their, can I say, demands, credit demands, and even go ahead and support them, close deals or secure the financing. So in this case, we also have a pay for results model or incentive, whereby deliverables are paid, what we call success fees for the transactions that are closed. And this fees is based on a percentage of the loan size, accessed by the enterprise. And also we strongly advocate for SMEs, or enterprises to share the transactional advisory costs related with the, the engagement with the business advisory service providers. So in this case, what the project is trying to address is insufficient, quality consulting services. You realize that we have still in the agriculture space, we have a myriad of enterprises with, potential for growth, but because of that, insufficient or inaccessibility to quality consulting services, this could be in financial, transaction advisory, or even strategy, even business performance, then you realize that these SMEs, despite the potential they hold, they are not able, to make steps and grow. So in this case, the business advisory service providers are supporting enterprises with advisory services. So, and this has enabled them to identify opportunities and raise capital in the underserved markets. Now, so far, this is what the project has managed, to achieve over its 3 years of implementation. We've noticed that the smart incentives with the partner financial institutions we're working with and the business advisory service providers to date has been able to mobilize over 277 million US dollars. And this is, private capital. For example, you realize, there is one clear, learning from the dry zones of northeastern Kenya, whereby we've been able, to raise 400,000, US dollars, which has ended in the hands of SMEs in that region. And so what is coming out clear here is that, catalyzing private capital for enterprise-driven development is really a major contributor to inclusive economic growth. Now, these are the lessons that we've been able to learn over the years, that the incentive model acts as a stimulus for partner financial institutions or financiers and the transactional advisors. And this has deepened engagement and, helping the underserved market also be reached through agriculture financing. The other thing is that the pay for results incentive has resulted to banks, developing financial products and increasing their lending, to target sectors. As I mentioned earlier, agriculture is perceived to be quite risky, and many at times financiers have shied from that space. But we are slowly seeing that this incentive model is trying to transform the market system. For instance, there is the Kenya, there's an aquaculture product that has been developed by one of the local banks. And this product is targeted at financing, input suppliers or producers, or even actors along the value chain within the aquaculture space. And that's one good example that products that match or are aligned to particular sectors can be able to promote, inclusivity and increase accessibility to credit by underserved markets. The other, other thing I would wish to talk about is what we've seen to be the challenges. And some of these challenges have informed, how we are able to operate and roll out the project for maximum, impact. And one thing is that, within the agriculture space, you realize that we are talking largely about small-scale farmers. Most of the times they are subsistence farmers, and even for those who are trying to do, commercial agriculture, then they lack collateral, and this being one of the basic requirements by financial institutions, then this has hindered them to really access credit or loans. And what we have tried to work around this is, promote mechanization in agriculture, and also work with financial institutions to see how, the credit provided can be de-risked alongside, the assets that have been, secured through the credit. For instance, tractors, in agricultural production. So a financial institution can provide that credit, asset financing, and still leverage on that asset as, a collateral. And, by so doing, then we are seeing a number of these agribusiness actors being able to access credit. The other thing is what I've already mentioned, the non-suitability of financial instruments that are used to appraise loan applications or even unfavorable credit terms. So what we have also seen here is working with banks, together, like I think what Nuru was mentioning in regard to the e-learning, concept, whereby also the, staff within the financial institutions are able to appreciate, the dynamics within the agriculture space, and then be able, based on that understanding, to come up with products that really match or are aligned with the actors within that space. And so by so doing also, then that enables many of these actors to access credit and thereby promoting, inclusion. The other aspect is, the below potential performance of agriculture, which is also largely attributed to, low public investment in this space. I think, and this is a school of thought held by many, that we need also to see government, public sector investing in the agriculture space. By so doing, then they will be able also to encourage, private capital flowing into that space, because, through the investments, they're able to de-risk some components that stand out to be, scary or impeding, the investment that should be flowing from the private sector. The other thing is that most of the times the farmers we're talking about are not really well organized, and that has reduced the viability that the formal financial institutions really want to see, and therefore promoting farmer organization whereby they are able to aggregate, even their produce and perhaps attract to lucrative markets and even reduce the cost of operations. Then they are able to, then thrive, so to speak, and stand to be promising and before a financial. So that's it from my end, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Shem, for that perspective from a development sector point of view. And congratulations on the great successes that you've managed to achieve in the 3 years of the program, especially in the agriculture space, where we know a lot of innovation is required to drive the ability for the financial services space to be able to access or provide access to financial instruments for farmers. So staying within the development space, I want to bring in Timothy Nzioka, Director of Program Operations for Africa at the US Africa Development Foundation, to give his presentation. We are running a little bit behind time, so Timothy, if you can keep your presentation concise, that would be appreciated so that we can jump into the panel discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maxwell. I'll try to be very quick with my presentation. So a lot has been discussed about sustainability, inclusiveness. So I'm going to focus specifically on an example of some of the things that we are doing as USADF. So let me start by introducing USADF for those who may not be very familiar. United States Africa Development Foundation is a US government agency that was set up back in 1980. So we have been operating for the last 40 years, and we have 3 key services that we provide to the various constituents that I'm going to talk about. The first one is grant capital of up to a maximum of 250,000, mainly to grassroots enterprises, SMEs, and entrepreneurs. When we talk about grassroots enterprises, we are talking about producer groups, cooperatives, farmer organizations, those entities at the grassroots level. The next service that we provide is capacity building that is provided through our local partners across the sub-Saharan Africa. And the third one is connections, because we appreciate that both capital and capacity building is not all what SMEs and grassroots enterprises require, but that connection, whether it is to markets, whether it is for other additional services. So we address issues around poverty alleviation, increasing incomes at the grassroots level, focusing on individuals, communities, and economies. We address issues of food insecurity and issues of employment. Now, one of the critical things that we focus on is 100% African-owned and led entities. And our support in Africa is also provided by 100% of Africans. We do not have any expatriates on the continent providing support and our programming. Currently, we are in 21 African countries. You can see all of them there, 10 within the East and Southern Africa, and 11 Central and West Africa. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the impact within the last 5 years. But jumping straight to talk a little bit about inclusiveness. What we know, and this has been highlighted by my colleagues who presented earlier, is that a lot of grassroots enterprises and SMEs are excluded from commercial investments. When they walk to a bank, they are not investor ready. They are considered too small by majority of the big development institutions, but they are too large for what we may consider as microfinance institutions. So what are some of the challenges that inhibit SMEs from accessing commercial investment? The first one is lack of records, because they don't keep records of their business operations. And this is critically important because they need to provide proof of historical performance as well as the existence of internal systems and controls. Now, the other key constraint is that majority of these SMEs still operate on cash basis, despite the fact that we currently have multiple options for banking business transactions, including M-Pesa, where they can be able to provide proof of their cash flows and back their investment proposals. The SMEs also fail to present clear business plans or even verbally articulate the business growth strategies. And when they even have a very good proposition of what they are doing, this proposition is poorly constructed and they are unable to make a concise presentation, and it becomes unattractive to potential investors. Then they also lack the understanding of financial systems and availability of different investment instruments and products, and focusing just on products that require collateral. Unfortunately, most of them do not have acceptable security, and one of my colleagues talked about that. Now, the thing is that even the bank that is present here will tell you that we have a lot of products that do not require collateral. But how many people know about that? With that understanding, USAID, in collaboration with the Stanbic Bank, have come up with a 5-year program. Is valued currently at $10 million US, focusing on Kenya, but we are likely going to grow it into other markets where both the organizations have got presence. And the idea is to support SMEs and grassroots enterprises to be investment ready, addressing the challenges that I've just talked about. So this is both combining grant capital and technical assistance so that these SMEs improve the internal systems and capacities. They're able to build business and investment plans, and they're able to improve and refine their marketing systems and online presence. Now, the end game where we expect to land is that once we provide the capacity building and the catalytic grants to promising SMEs, then they will be able to unlock potential future capital. And we are now going through our first cohort where we put out public requests for applications. We received over 500 applications, screened them. Over 240 SMEs and grassroots enterprises met our basic funding criteria. And we subjected them to rigorous selection process. We were able to come up with a long list of 50, went down to 21. Then we provided financial fitness training to the 21 and helped them preparing to understand how to pitch their investments. And we had a very productive pitch event last week where the 21 pitched their investments. And we had a panel of 8 professionals from the private sector, from USADF and from Stanbic. And we selected 7 promising SMEs. We are currently going through project development so that we understand what they require in terms of the catalytic grant to address the gaps existing in their respective enterprises. So the grant value is expected to be maximum of $50,000 per enterprise. And this is not to focus on productive activities, not on working capital, not on capex, not on other operational issues, but really looking at making these SMEs investor ready. We expect the grant agreements to be signed the first week of December, and we'll be opening a second round of applications. And this is going to be ongoing for the next 5 years. So this is just one example of some of the things we are doing to ensure there is inclusiveness for enterprises that are looking for commercial investments. Because experience providing grant capital in the last 40 years is that some SMEs tend then to look for soft credit or soft grants, which is not sustainable. But if we are able to provide them with that platform so that they can graduate, then we'll have a graduation model where they come in a conveyor belt when they are not investor ready, they go through a system like ours. At the end of the system, they're investor ready, they can approach other commercial investors. And we are trying to even get into blended finance, where we provide grant capital alongside loans. And this is something that we are doing in partnership with DFC, Development Finance Corporation of the US. And we'll be doing it in 4 markets initially: Nigeria, Senegal, Uganda. Unfortunately, Kenya is not one of them, but we are hopeful that we will soon be expanding to Kenya. So because of time, I will stop there to allow for questions at the appointed time, and then we can respond and provide some more insight if that becomes necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and congratulations on your partnership with Stanbic Bank and the great work that you are doing, catalyzing access to finance at that grassroots level. So at this juncture, I want to bring in Elliot Thornton, who's the sustainability expert at Hudson Sandler, to moderate a panel discussion with our speakers. Over to you, Elliot.
Great, thank you, Maxwell, and thank you to all of our speakers for all their insights. I think, ahead of COP26, this is an incredibly exciting and dynamic area to be discussing. We're now going to move into a bit of a Q&A with the speakers. I have some burning questions, but anyone in the audience, if you have something that you want me to raise, just pop it in the chat, and I'll do my best to kind of work it in. One of the, during this session, we're going to have some additional insights as well from Sigee, who is the banking and finance lead at Dentons, Hamilton, Harrison, and Matthews. And Sigee, I kind of wanted to turn to you first, just to have you, tell us a little bit about your experience and to reflect a little bit on the discussions we've kind of heard so far.
Thank you, Elliot, and I think thank you to the speakers. It was quite interesting to hear, particularly from Nuru and Birju, about what it is the banks are doing. I think there's some statistics that Nuru spoke of, where you have her saying that at least 76.2% of banks in Kenya are reporting that they do have ESG mechanisms. I think you have 81% of them saying that they take these kind of considerations into their lending or into their business. what Birju spoke about, where he says that, I think Standard Chartered Bank is putting in provisions now that they require you to have some form of strategy or some form of plan around getting to net zero when it comes to carbon. And I think I have to speak to this from a legal perspective. So what we get is, in typical financing transactions in Kenya, you would simply get a facility letter from a bank. What you would have in there is a simple one-liner where the bank has just put an obligation on the borrower to comply with the Environmental Management Act of Kenya. You don't really see anything around social requirements, although we do have laws like the OSHA, the Operational Safety and Health Act, where every company or every individual in Kenya is supposed to comply with that. So it is interesting to see on one end that the reporting seems to show that banks have these kinds of mechanisms in place or require the mechanisms in place. But when we come to practical day-to-day lending transactions, you don't really see the ESG element or the sustainable financing element coming through in the documentation that we do. When we deal with DFIs and international lenders, you have typical facility agreements where you have a lot of covenants, you have a lot of representations around ESG, you have monitoring requirements. I think I've even recently dealt with one where you have to have a sustainability coordinator come on board. So in the Kenya space, we don't really see much of ESG or sustainable finance coming in through what we do, but when you look at it from an international perspective, then it's there. So I think in conclusion, it's one thing for the statistics to show that the banks are trying to do something, but in practice, trickling that down, I think will take some time. I think I'll say in conclusion that we have the CBK now, which has issued a guideline requiring banks to take into account sustainable finance and ESG into their day-to-day lending. So maybe that is what will trickle it down when we look at banking and finance law and the kind of security and facility agreements and whatnot that we do in Kenya.
Great, and I think there's quite an interesting trend emerging about the kind of interaction between the kind of international systems that we're starting to emerge that are both from a mandatory perspective and voluntary perspective, instituting requirements on lenders from an ESG perspective. So, I mean, certainly, we've seen at the G20 level, the G7 level, pushing things like TCFD disclosure requirements at a mandatory level. Birju, what I was kind of really interested in is, as an international institution, how are those kind of global developments in the kind of reporting that's expected of company translating into the way that you're working in kind of Kenya?
Thanks, Elliot. So Elliot, Standard Chartered has been reporting under TCFD and will continue to do so. But and domestically, we have a sustainability report that covers not just what we do for clients, but also what we do internally with our own operations. Be it our energy consumption, waste management, paper usage, etc. But that said, there is a lot more that needs to be done to make it more all-encompassing, 2, more industry widespread, and 3, more transparent. And that's part of the course. So whether you see the EU taxonomy or whether you look at the work IFRS is doing, it's just a matter of time before everybody has to report this into their numbers. But just taking a step back, Nuru talked about things like the Equator Principles. It's not just US banks. Standard Chartered signed up to them right at the beginning. We just heard Sigee talking about banks not incorporating the language in the documentation. Again, as I mentioned earlier, every single one of our clients goes through, on the corporate side, goes through an ESG assessment, and we rate them high, medium, low, particularly on the ones that are high, very deep covenants around sustainability, monitoring. In certain instances, as Sigee mentioned, we have sustainability consultants come in and do quarterly assessments or semi-annual assessments. And this is not, and this is on the Kenyan continent. I'm not talking in Kenya. I'm sorry, and this is not just at a global level. But again, the ones that are rated low, we may not put in covenants around them because just the cost of implementing some of this, doesn't make it worthwhile for an SME, for example. So I guess there is a lot to do in this space, but we as banks have started the journey. There is, as I mentioned, a lot to do. We will pick up best practice as they come implemented. And you talked about reporting, and as I said, we've already reporting under TCFD, and we'll continue to make changes as things evolve.
Great, and another thing that kind of came out, I think, quite strongly through the discussion today was, this importance of partnership, really, to get to a point where, particularly in sectors where there's not this embedded, data and disclosure and the capacity to manage these sustainability issues. I wondered, maybe Nuru, you could talk about the kind of partnerships that we need to see between kind of the financial sector on one hand, but then also, parts of the public sector and regulators, and how this ecosystem can kind of come together to help basically Kenya capture a lot more of the sustainable investment that's, frankly, is looking for somewhere to go around the world.
Thanks so much, Elliot. I think my other colleagues really brought out some of the things that we need. So a lot of the ecosystems are largely informal, and I think this is where the public sector can come in to try to help bring and incentivize formalization. We have done so many projects as KBA. We supported about 300 young men in informal settlements to start and formalize their businesses. And what you realize from a lot of these interactions is that the social contract is broken. People don't trust that if they register their business, they pay their taxes, they pay their daily permit, that they will get the services from the government. So I think that's a lot of the challenge that a lot of people are facing. So I think public sector has a big role to play in incentivizing and encouraging formalization, and then that way we can help on the financing side. I think the other probably point I'd like to think about is, and my colleague, I think it was Shem, who talked about issues around distortion for some of these programs. I think we need to start really understanding the fit for purpose aspect of a lot of these interventions. So I don't think a lot of these interventions work for every and all micro, small businesses and those in the agricultural sector. There's an interesting project, KBA, in partnership with Financial Sector Deepening in Kenya Climate Innovation Center has been doing this past year. It's a blended finance project, and we've been really trying to understand what will it take to get banks to finance, and I see Jane Wayaki is here from APSA, what will it take to get banks to finance micro entrepreneurs in the green economy? And what you find is some of these government interventions and DFI funded programs, the grant programs, they're actually creating dependence. And a lot of these micro entrepreneurs are modeling their businesses and their business cases and their cash flow projections around free money. So therefore, when it comes to trying to get them to scale up or transition to a commercial environment, they're not, it's not going to work. So we really need, I think, a lot of engagement to really understand what is fit for purpose for some of these programs. What are those green economy profiles? I call them green economy profiles. What are those profiles that the free grant money works, the blended finance works, and how you scale, you roll in and feed in to the commercial side, which is the most sustainable, accessing through the commercial financial markets. So I think that's how I'd answer. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I would say.
No, it's really interesting, and I think the creativity around financial mechanisms is incredibly exciting, actually, particularly. And we're doing a lot of work in different parts of Africa and the financial sector, and some of the ideas that people are coming up with to channel funding into into areas of the economy that have really struggled to get it before is quite amazing. Timothy, I think you kind of got your hand up. Was there something that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, because Nuru touches on a very important aspect. A lot of SMEs at that level, they go looking out for free money. And we know that there's nothing called free money. And if we allow them to be dependent on grant capital, then we are setting them to fail. So like the partnership that I've just talked about, one of the major criteria for selecting the SME was that they must have applied for a commercial loan and it was rejected, and they needed to provide the proof of why it was rejected. So that we address that particular constraint, we needed to have them to articulate what it is that they want to do post the grant investment, so that we know at the end of it, they are not just going to sit and relax, but they are looking at how they are going to grow. So I think if we can, those in development circle, look at this as a graduation process, then we will enable SMEs and grassroots enterprises to actually focus more on commercial investment. And if there is an element of grant capital, then it is only there to help them push to get to the level where they can be attractive to commercial investors. I just wanted to make that addition.
Yeah, thank you. That's an important point. And Shem, did I just see you wanted to add something as well?
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. Yeah, I think I want to emphasize what Timothy has mentioned. For sure, I mean, many of the development partners now are moving away from aid to what they are calling trade. Sorry for that. So there is more focus on, developing market systems rather than, handing out aid, which has proved over the years not to be sustainable. And so I think models that can really transform the trade, finance, and investment market ecosystem will really do us, great benefit. For instance, what I was talking about previously, as a program, what is happening is that we will wish to see in this ecosystem the business or transaction advisors, because they really play a big role of helping these SMEs who don't really have that capacity. They need some form of handholding and mentorship, and they have huge potential. So they just need that technical touch so that they can sprout and grow. And therefore, what we want to see is their role within the market system appreciated, in the sense that the technical support they are providing SMEs to a level whereby they are investor ready, and then they can secure credit and further grow, plays, can I say, a significant role. On the other hand, we have financiers, and most of the times, as we say, for them, for sure, it is business, and therefore, it would make sense for me to invest somewhere where certainly I'm not going to, make some returns, so to speak. And therefore, I think that partnership between financial institutions, business development service providers, and such kind of, can I say, models like the Pay for Results initiative will for sure stimulate the market system and even promote sustainability, because like what we've seen in our project, we've seen an increase in the number of SMEs who are willing to pay for transactional advisory services. And that way, those transactions can proceed even, outside any form of external funding, so to speak. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things here, and Shem, actually, maybe you have some insights because you work across various different sectors. What we're seeing is sustainable finance working quite well in the energy space, particularly, but there kind of mechanisms that you've seen that have worked quite well to diversify where this finance is going, particularly for kind of rural areas, younger people, those kind of smaller enterprises?
Sorry, I think I lost you some.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me a bit better now?
Yeah.
I was just saying there's, and this really, you know, any speakers that want to jump in on this, you know, there's a large concentration of finance from a sustainable perspective in energy, and as Nuru referred to, you know, a massive, actually quite a concentration of it, more than it needs. You know, how can we find innovative ways to get finance into other areas of the economy where it's needed to act sustainably?
Yeah, I think maybe one answer to that, and this has really been alluded to many of us in this speaking, public spending, for instance, in agriculture in Kenya ranges between 3 to 6%, you know, of our budget. And, you know, more public investments towards initiatives that are designed to reduce lending risks is required to enable, you know, commercial lenders to focus on those sectors as profitable. So to mobilize the much needed resources for investment and trade, you know, there is need for concerted effort and partnership, public and private sector, you know, to address such kind of, you know, can I say, risks. For instance, we're seeing an expansion in terms of infrastructural development within the country. Certainly, this you know, contributes greatly to serving the underserved markets and building some form of confidence in some of these underserved markets that they can also really thrive and you know, be able to meet their part of the bargain. For instance, if it's a loan, so to speak. So, for instance, a farmer in Northeastern is able to access markets, is able to, you know, reservice their loans they've taken. And this builds some form of confidence from within the market system.
Great. And
Elliot, can I?
we'll go through Nuru and then Birju, and then I'll hand back to Maxwell.
Thank you. I think I was having breakfast with a friend, Pooja, who has launched an insurtech company yesterday, and she was talking about a book she's read, and it's all about rethinking and reimagining. And, you know, obviously with this COVID space, we have a new vocabulary, right? We've moved from the word pivot to, what is it, resilience as being the buzzword. But I think we really need to rethink this issue of climate finance. I think we're talking about it from a billions and trillions. We talk billions and trillions. That's why it's easy to deploy to energy, because energy can consume, you can deploy very efficiently, quickly, the billions and trillions. But where the impact is, like I mentioned before, is on the millions level, the lower level. So I think we need to repurpose how we raise capital as fund managers, as the various sovereign-backed frameworks. And we really need to think about, it might not be as efficient, but if we really want to create some impact, we're going to have to lower the trillions and billions to millions and even thousands when you're talking about that grassroots level. And I know, Birju, you don't get out of bed unless it's billions and trillions. But if we really want to help this continent, we need to start looking at, like I mentioned, these municipal sectors like water, forestry. And if you think about it, not many of us own thousands upon thousands of acres of land, right? So we really need to start thinking about the smaller parcels, and then creating ecosystems, you know, the aggregating aspect, just so you can get that efficiency. But I think we just need to rethink this issue of how climate finance is coming into this market and how it's moving around and how it's being allocated. Thank you.
Sure. Nuru, thanks for that. Okay, you're right. It's easy to talk about an oil pipeline or a toll road and deploy hundreds of millions of dollars. But let me take it a step back. We at the heart are a commercial bank, and as are many banks who are present here and in Kenya. I'll give you an example of some of the things that we're just in the midst of crystallizing. So one, in our own procurement as a bank, you know, we have thousands of suppliers doing various things. How do we involve inclusiveness into our our supply chain. So we talked about climate finance. I'm talking about inclusive finance here, and we're thinking about things like 30%. So the areas we're looking at are women, youth, and people with disabilities, and how do we incorporate them into becoming suppliers to the bank, supporting them as well. And I said, as we're in the process of crystallizing our targets around that, and when we're ready, we'll be public with them. But at the same time, we take that to our clients. So our multinationals who have supply chains. I talked about the data, and the research showed us that the challenge is in the supply chains. We launched sustainable trade finance products earlier this year in Kenya. The uptake has been relatively low, but one of the things is, how do we take it to these clients and then incentivize them and say, if your suppliers can meet certain targets set by yourself, i.e. the multinational, then we give them preferential pricing, etc. I'll give you another example. Recently, we did a loan in one of our markets, not in Kenya, where the client said that they would like to see more women on their boards. So the loan is linked to having how many women they put on their board, and if they don't, they've agreed to take a penalty or an increased cost if they don't do it. So there's various ways we can do this, and I focus more on the inclusive side of things more than the sustainable finance piece.
And then Sigee, I can see your hands up. I'll come to you, and then I might just get a last parting shot from Timothy as well before we hand back to Maxwell.
No, I think just to add on to this, because the CBK this month has issued an actual guideline on requiring banks to put in place sustainable finance mechanisms. So it's not an if I want to, it's I must, because these guidelines are issued and they become part of law. And what CBK has said, it has given banks until June 2022 to actually have a plan in place, which trickles down into the business that they're doing. So I think you will expand the people that you lend to and the kind of business that you do, because it is now a legal requirement for you to take this into consideration for everybody, not just your big ticket people like the energy or transport or whatever. It will have to go down to each and every customer that you have as a legal requirement. I think we're also seeing that the NSE is issuing guidelines on ESG. They're in draft right now, but you will have listed companies having to report on ESG annually to the NSE. And with that, then you're sort of expanding the scope for who is bound by these rules and who has to report to regulators, and how all this is looked at in the market in Kenya.
Great, thank you. And Timothy, just before we go, is there anything that you wanted to add to the discussion before I hand back to Maxwell?
Yes, probably just to simply say that this has been a short discussion. It is opening opportunities to engage further. Just to follow up on what Nuru said, in other markets, like for example in Senegal, we have placed our grant money in the hands of financial institutions so that they can do what they are best at. So that instead of giving out the grant money, then we allow financial institutions to give out loans which are repayable. And this is true in the energy sector. While we may say there is a lot of money that has gone into this sector, we should be able to look at it at different levels. We have mega projects when it comes to the actual generation of power. Then we have got the middle level where we are talking about the distribution. But when you get down to the grassroots, how are small businesses benefiting from green energy? Do they have even the resources that they can actually be able to access? Whether it is just for simple lighting and utilization with simple appliances at home or at the place of work, or whether it is for actual processing. And therefore, looking at the millions and billions that Nuru talked about, there is actually a place for hundreds of thousands of shillings, because that is where the need is. That is where our population is. That is where the youth who are looking for employment, women, that is where they are. And therefore, for banks to be able to establish partnerships with other key players, because they may not have the tools to reach this population. There are those other institutions that have the capabilities of doing so. So establishing powerful partnerships may be able to get us closer to what we are looking for. And finally, moving away from the energy space and looking at low-cost housing, looking at potable water. Those are other elements that are critical at community level. So there is a lot to be done. We just need to work together as partners, utilizing our capabilities for the benefit of the people that we serve. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that was a fantastic message to wrap up on, actually. And I'll go back to the AmCham team to just wrap up the session now.
Thank you so much, Timothy, for that. And really, I would like to concur that this has been a short discussion. I think we could have had a whole 2 hours discussing the topics that we've covered today. And we look forward to bringing the group together to really unpack some of the issues that we've discussed. Thank you to the Hudson Sandler team for your facilitation and your partnership in this initiative that was launched this year, the AmCham Force for Good, which really seeks to amplify what our members are doing, but also catalyze a robust conversation in the whole of the Kenyan private sector about what more private sector can do, how we can partner better to really mainstream sustainable and practices and sustainability in core business practices. So thank you very much. This is the 3rd roundtable of the series, and we'll be closing out the series on the 11th of November under the theme Inclusion and Opportunity. So we welcome all of you to join us for that session. Thank you very much to the speakers, Nuru, Shem, Birju, Sigee, and Timothy again. Thank you very, very much for your contributions, your candor in sharing your experiences, and really the thought leadership that you've provided us this morning. So thank you very much. As part of the initiative, we have a survey that we're conducting, which is to benchmark businesses' priorities on sustainability and social impact, and to assess whether, especially for the multinationals, whether the global strategies are really trickling down to the local and in-country strategies. And this will serve as our benchmark in moving forward in the coming years on how we will address some of the issues that private sector is facing in implementing sustainability and social impact in Kenya. So my colleague Rhoda will post the survey in the chat box. Please do take it. It takes all of 2 minutes and it's completely anonymous, and it will really help us drive the initiative forward. So with that, we're going to bring the session to a close. We've completely run out of time. Thank you for staying with us over time. Maxwell, Chris, if you have anything else to add, you're welcome.
No, just thanking everybody, echoing what you've said, and thank you so much for a really wonderful discussion this morning. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.